Welcome to this presentation. First of all, I would like to thank the Global Gurmit Institute for organizing this wonderful conference. My topic is the Bollywoodization of the Indian diaspora, identity and Hindi films. And I will try to show how Bollywood films have helped in the identity issues with Indians wherever they are in the diaspora. So this paper is a continuation of my research on the impact of Indian movies in the Caribbean and in the Indian diaspora. Information for this paper was obtained from interviews that I conducted with persons from Mauritius, South Africa, Fiji, Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. So basically, I'll be looking at in the beginning of the introduction, basic things about the Indian diaspora. Then we look at Indian movies in the Indian diaspora, Bollywood in the diaspora. Then I take a quick look at my findings and conclusion. So we all know that 186 years ago, Indian indentureship began when Britain introduced indentured labor to Mauritius in what was termed the Great Experiment, and that was quite successful. It was so successful rather, that they introduced indentureship to Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad, South Africa, Fiji, and so many other countries, including Guadeloupe. It is estimated that during the indentureship period, more than 1.5 million Indians were indentured to the various parts of the diaspora, and they came mainly from areas of Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, Bengal, among other areas. Those people who went as indentured immigrants, not all of them returned home. In fact, my research shows that roughly 75% of all Indian indentured immigrants decided to remain permanently in their new homelands. And they were offered inducements, and of course, there were the push and pull factors with regards to returning to India. Then the diaspora is made up further of the remigration of diaspora Indians, the descendants of the indentured immigrants from areas in the diaspora to the USA, Canada, England, Holland, Australia, New Zealand, among other areas. There was also a second wave of migration from India, and those were free Indians who went to work in the country, various countries, diaspora countries and developed countries. And they went mainly because of trade, educational opportunities, employment practices, and basically in the USA, there was the removal of immigration restrictions, among other things. So the Indian diaspora may comprise roughly about 25 million persons. And if we add the gypsies to that, you can get about 30 million people in the Indian diaspora. And they live in more than 170 countries throughout the world. They do a lot of trade with India. And one of the most important markets, trades rather, with India is mainly Bollywood movies to these diaspora areas. Now, Indian movies started in India in 1912, which was roughly 78 years after the first group of Indians went as immigrants. So when they went as immigrants, Indian movies were not yet being available in India. It was not made in India. And the first Indian movie was made in 1912. And the name of that movie was Raja Harishchandra by Dada Saheb Phalke. By 1930, no, those were silent movies. And by 1931, India introduced sound into Indian movies. That movie was Alam Ara, and this was a hugely successful foray that introduced a new dimension in Indian cinema. And this is where I'm going to be talking a lot more about in terms of the Indian diaspora, how music, sound, and dances impacted on the diaspora Indians. The music and the songs in Alam Ara changed the face of Indian cinema and ushered in an era that is still with us today. Indian film producers, they became so enraptured with the songs and music in movies that in one particular movie, in 1937, Indra Sabha, there were 71 songs in that movie, a record that still stands even till today. So that's to show you how much they were taken up with the songs and music and so on. So that songs and music eventually became the mainstay of Indian cinema, and subsequently, as we shall see later, it also became the most prevalent aspect of Indian culture in the original diaspora countries. Almost 100 years after the first Indian indentured immigrants left India for the colonies, Indian movies followed them to the diaspora countries, and that slice of India would change their lives forever. Now, we must remember that when they first left India, they took with them a slice of India. And that slice of India really was their culture, their religion, their songs, their music, the dances, their folk songs in particular, their traditional ways of doing things, their traditional songs and music and so on. And that was their identity in these areas where they lived. So they had the harmonium, they had the sitar, they had the sarangi, the tablas and so on, and their clothing and all other aspects of the Indian culture that they took with them. And that was the first slice of culture that they took with them. And they protected it, they kept it as if it was in a box and strenuously fought against changes wrought by westernization and other inputs. And they tried to protect it from other assailants. The indentured immigrants were almost completely cut off from India. We must remember that these were people who were cut off from India, and their only link with India were the indentured immigrants who came to the plantation and brought news about India. And of course, there were one or two traders who settled in those areas. So they were totally lost. They had no idea what changes had taken place over the last almost 100 years since they had left India, or since their parents or the grandparents had left India. So we're talking now about the descendants as we move into the 1920s and 30s after indentureship. So by the 1930s, this slice of India that was brought with the indentured immigrants began to wane under the pressure of westernization, Christian aggressiveness, and mainly because there was nothing new that was added to their culture. Very little was added, and so it became stagnated. It faced calcification, and several indentured immigrants and their descendants buckled under the pressure of westernization and began to slowly adapt to the wider society and westernization. So by the late 1920s and 30s and beyond, a second slice of India followed the indentured immigrants to their diaspora countries. But this slice of India was different. And that slice of India turned back the tide and helped to prevent many Indians from becoming westernized. So whereas that the earlier slice of India that they had brought with them comprised of traditional songs, music, dances, and religion and so on, this new slice of India, the new guy on the block, which is saw as representing India, while it contains songs, music, and dances, represented not the real India, but a cellular India, a make-believe India, an India that was in a real R-E-E-L. So that India that they were seeing, that was brought to them in the 1930s and late 1920s and 30s and beyond, it was India in a real. And they mistook that India that they were seeing there for the real India. It was not the traditional Indian culture that they were accustomed to. It brought with it a celluloid culture for their consumption, and that was the songs, music, dances, and clothing, etc., that they saw. But to them, this new slice of India represented their imagined India, because they had no idea what India looked like. It was the missing link with India, the link they had longed for. They had yearned for that link, a link that they searched for so long, a link that they had hoped will traverse time and space. So Indian movies became that link with India, that missing link for them. It is said that a drowning man clutches at a straw, and the Indians in the diaspora were literally lost with little contact with India, and they were like drowning people. Now they were seeing India in their new adopted homeland. It was an India that they were willing to identify with, and they grasped at that identity straw that Indian movies provided. That recognition life through films. They saw in those films, they saw places that they had only heard about in stories about Rajas and Ranis. They saw places that they had heard about from the Ramayana and Bhagavad Yagnas. When they went to Ramayana and Bhagavad Yagnas, they heard the Pandit talk about places like Chitrakoot and so on, and they were able to see these places in the Indian movies. And of course, they heard about these things from newly indentured immigrants who had come. They saw people like themselves for the first time, because they were made to feel that they were lost, they had no identity, people laughed at them. So when they talked in their Hindi language, the people in the diaspora countries laughed at them. So for the first time, they were seeing people speaking in their own language, and that was identity for them. They were seeing people dressed in similar clothing with a dhoti and so on, with the gangri. And for that was identity for them. They were seeing people playing Indian instruments, and they were no longer ashamed of their culture, of their religion, of their dress, of their language. They saw people in movies using tools and other implements similar to those that they were accustomed to using in their new homeland. They saw the chulha, among other things. They no longer felt ostracized because they realized that there were people just like them in other parts of the world, in India. And when they looked at it, they saw those things. They had that aha experience that told them, aha, this is the same thing we have here. For instance, when they saw the chulha in the Indian movies, that was an aha experience for them. When they saw the Joota, even when the panchayat system was mentioned, when they saw the dress, when they saw how women were treated and so on, language and other aspects of life, all those things, they were identity factors for them. And it brought to them that aha experience and identity. When the Indian movies were first shown in diaspora countries, most of the people went to see the Indian movies, not because of the songs, music, and dances that happened later, or actors and actresses, or any of the other production factors. They went to see the Indian movie because it was something that came from India. It represented that missing link with India. And for them, it was a connection to India. So when they went, I have interviewed people who said when they went to see that Indian movie, it didn't matter what it was about. All they wanted to do was go because it was something from India. It was a reconnection to India for them. They found that the songs, and in later years, as they continued looking at Indian movies, they found the songs and music from the Indian movies very catchy, very rhythmic, and full of emotional melodies. So there was a little change as the generation progressed and the next generation took over. They began to love the music, the songs, the dances, and there was an attachment to Indian movies and to its spin-offs, songs, music, dress, and dances. So as the music changed, as the melodies changed, it became more popular, and that became very catchy to them. And those songs, music, and dances became for them an identity pillar. So even as they tried to remain true to their traditional culture that they had brought from India, East Indians in the colonies, in the diaspora countries, they were so attracted to the songs, music, dress, and dances from the Indian movies that in time, by the 1950s, filmy songs and music and dances had become the mainstay of their cultural offerings. In addition, East Indians in the diaspora largely began to mimic what they saw in the Indian movies in terms of songs, music, dances. So after a while, they began to mimic these songs. They wanted to sing the songs just as Mohammed Rafi, just as Lata Mangeshkar, and your voice had to sound almost like them. And so that mimicking also became part of their identity and made it part of the Indian culture. The mimicry of film songs and music gave rise to Indian orchestras and to filmy dances in the colonies. And by the early 1960s, there were hundreds of Indian orchestras and filmy mimic singers and dancers in the various colonies of the Indian diaspora. So in addition to many young Indians mimicked in their own way the songs and dances, they were also mimicking the hairstyles they saw with the Indian movie stars, Devanand's muff and so on, their dress, their makeup, their jewelry, when they saw the mouth organ, that became an important big thing for them in the villages. The mannerisms, the way the star boys or girls walked, they tried to copy that. If they had a handkerchief in their pocket, in their shirt pocket or in their pants pocket, they tried to copy that, and other aspects of their favorite stars. So what developed there was that the Indians in the diaspora were grasping at these straws and these things also became identity things for them. So Indian movies continued, and they continued to be played and sung in various places in religious settings. And then it began to impact not only their normal lives, the singing and dancing and so on at normal public programs, it also began to impact on their religion, their songs, their festivals and so on. So for Diwali and in Trinidad, Diwali Nagar, for Pagwa, for Ram Leela, in the Sabha, Indian rivalry, for Ramayans, and for Bhagwat Yagnas, filmy bhajans, songs that came from Indian movies, religious songs that came from Indian movies, began to take over these festivals. Today now, when we look at Pagwa, at Ram Leela, at Indian rivalry, majority of items are filmy songs and dances. So even at public events by government, hosted by government and major corporations, whenever representative East Indian items are required for such programs, especially in cosmopolitan countries where there's a government program and they need 1 or 2 items of Indian culture. Generally, it was found from my research that the filmy songs and dances were the order of the day. So gradually, as Indian film songs, music, dances, and dress became the mainstay of Indian cultural offerings in the diaspora, this Indian celluloid culture gradually pushed into the background traditional aspects of the culture the early Indian indented immigrants had brought to them. So what I saw from the research that I did, as time went by, the traditional culture, that first slice of India that they brought with them, that they kept in a box, that in a box that they were so proud of, as Indian movies became popular and the songs, music, and dances became popular, that began to be pushed into the background, and this new kid on the block generally took over. So in several instances, within at least 2 decades, this slice of India, the celluloid India, the filmy India, had effectively replaced many aspects of the original traditional slice of India that they had brought with them. So although and as time went by again, they continued, and with technology improvements and so on, Indian movies became the mainstay of their link to India. So although the diaspora Indians live in a globalized economy, in a globalized village, they look to India for cultural sustenance. And one of the most important areas that they turn to is the Indian movies, in addition to clothing and so on. Because of their cultural links to India, many of them established their own social networks, their own temple contacts, Indian movie linkages, through which they are able to keep in touch, alive, and well, and their values in Indian movies. To the diaspora Indians, Indian movies are regarded as cultural ambassadors, linkages, which culminate in a degree of convergence that contextualizes their presence in the diaspora. And millions of diaspora Indians are linked together by Indian movies as if they were not separated by state borders or oceans. So no matter where they live in the diaspora, they are linked together. The popularity of Indian movies in the diaspora has caused the blurring of boundaries in the globalized Indian diaspora setting. And this has been brought about through technological advancements such as access to the internet, computer ownership, high-end cell phones, and other gadgets. Thus, the average diaspora Indian could be anywhere in the world and still have a huge slice of India with him right on his lap, right in his phone, right in his home. He could review the latest Indian movie, download any film or video, or read a cinema magazine or journal, watch an Indian movie, get a video sound or a film stars, all from the comfort of his home, a feat still far removed from the average Indians in India. but which is today common to most of the diaspora Indians. Indians overseas today, they live in a kind of borderless Indian transnational Bollywood state, a deterritorialized, non-geographic state that while it is global in its setting, it is sustained mainly by the flow of movies from India. It is clear, therefore, that this transnational dialogue rests on the major pillar of Bollywood films and its spin-off in products such as songs, music, dances, clothing, jewelry, cuisine, magazines, and other items flowing from India through the Bollywood, through Bollywood to the West. The Bollywoodization of the Indian diaspora has in some ways, therefore, created a kind of borderless overseas Indian state made up of desperate communities, Indian diaspora countries and metropolitan cities and others in the global community linked primarily by the Indian movie, the largest cultural export of India in the global world since Indian independence. So Indian movies has been recorded as the largest cultural export of India since independence. And that's why it's so important to Indians wherever they are able to access it. It does not matter how far East Indians live from each other or what part of the globe they live in, they are likely to be connected to one another and to India through Bollywood movies. Bollywood movies portray and the reason for that is because Bollywood movies portray a sort of pan-Indian value system that finds favor with all diaspora Indians, regardless of caste, color, religion, regional origin, language, or other divisive elements. So one of the reasons why I found Indian movies or Bollywood movies were so popular is because of their portrayal of a pan-Indian value system that finds a meaning for almost every Indian wherever they are. This transnational borderless state have come to symbolize Indianness among Indians everywhere so that they can connect with each other wherever they are through the Indian movies on social media, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, you name it, they are able to contact each other in a transnational dialogue. So quickly to some of my findings. And this is one of the main things I discovered is that Bollywood movies have become the single most potent bond that joins Indians of the diaspora with India, individually and collectively. Another findings in India, the government did not consider the celluloid culture Indian culture. The filmy culture was not Indian culture for the government of India. But in the diaspora countries, I found that the Indian indented immigrants and their descendants accepted Indian movies and its spin-offs as representing India and the culture of India. So what they saw, they took the songs and music, the dances from the Indian movies, made it part of their culture, and it became Indian culture for them. Whereas in India, it is not considered true Indian culture. Another finding is that the Indian movie brought to them India in blurring images, and they saw an India which was real to them, and it was in a reel though, and which they linked to the imagined India that they had created for identity purposes. This new Indian celluloid culture, therefore, became the dominant culture among East Indians in the diaspora, so that today, when discussions are held on matters relating to Indian culture, this celluloid culture assumes pride of place in those discussions when we talk about identity, when we talk about Indian culture in the diaspora. Another findings, public cultural programs in most countries in the diaspora are dominated by items derived from Indian filmy world. From the Indian filmy world. Public consumption of the filmy culture and its spin-offs is by far more popular than that of the traditional cultural offerings that they originally had brought from India, which still survives in a lot of the areas, but are not as popular as the filmy culture. Another finding, the advent of Indian movies in the Indian diaspora gave new life to Indian culture and to some extent was the main reason for the revival of Indian culture in the diaspora countries and some metropolitan areas such as New York, Toronto, and London. In that, I'm saying here that because by the 1930s and almost into the 40s, Indian culture was on the wane because of pressure for adaptation and so on in westernized countries. When Indian movies came, it gave a new life to Indians there. They found something new to grasp, and that became part of the Indian culture and their identity. Several aspects of what passes for Indian culture in many of the diaspora countries and metropolitan cities can be traced to Indian movies and its spin-offs. In most diaspora countries, major aspects of the traditional culture were gradually pushed into the background and replaced by the spin-offs of film songs, music, and dances from Indian movies. Largely, those filmy spin-offs came to be regarded as Indian culture in diaspora countries. And I quote here one of the interviewees, one of the best I got was from Kenneth Lala, who said, if you were to remove all traces of the influence of Indian movies on Indian culture in the diaspora territories today, Indian culture would be denuded of its most appealing aspects to East Indians in those communities. In fact, I might add that the majority of what is considered Indian culture today would be lost. And that encapsulates almost everything I wanted to say about the impact of Indian movies in the diaspora. So, conclusion, diaspora Indians are connected to Indianness everywhere. More particularly, they are connected with the ancestral homeland, India, through the Indian movie and with each other through blogs, chat rooms, internet, and other such things. This transnational cultural phenomenon that significantly ties in with Indian films in the diaspora constitute a major plank in the evolution of Indian identity in the diaspora. Among the majority of the diaspora Indians, Indian movies form a major pillar of their identity and existence. In Indian diaspora countries such as Fiji, Mauritius, Suriname, South Africa, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, a large part of the Indian identity is linked to Indian movies, either directly or indirectly. Now, that is not to say that Indian identity is not linked to other areas as well. Indian identity in the diaspora countries are also linked to cuisine, to the foods, to the religion, to festivals, to folk traditions, to dressing, to the dress, among other areas. But the Bollywood waters seem to have infiltrated all of them in several ways. Indian movies followed the route of the early Indian indented immigrants and served as the major pillar of support in their search for identity. It also allowed them the opportunity to return to their roots, albeit through the celluloid route. Filmy Indian culture as an identity marker remained alive in the settlement diaspora communities despite its continued contestation for space. In that contestation for space, aspects of the filmy culture has evolved into new forms of Indian culture, such as the chutney phenomenon in the Caribbean, yet it retains the filmy Bollywood flavor. So although they have taken the Indian movie songs and so on, and they've taken and did more with it, made changes to them in the diaspora, they have retained the Bollywood flavor. And in particular, I'm talking here about the chutney phenomenon that began in the Caribbean and sweeping all over the diaspora. So these are some of the interviewees from Trinidad, from Suriname, the Netherlands, from Fiji, France, Guyana, Netherlands, again, Mauritius, South Africa, and so on. So in conclusion, I want to say thanks to the conference organizers, in particular the Girmitya Global Institute. I want to say a special thanks to Ganesh Chand and to Farzana Gaunda and all others associated with this conference. And I want to say a special thanks to Mr. Ranjit for recording this video. Thank you very much.